he'll know exactly what he's missed. And maybe just to say a couple of things sort of before we delve in. What we've done so far has really all been from the voice of the anonymous layer of the Talmud. Okay, the sort of broad questions of language when it comes to the Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah formulate its case in the linguistic way that it does? And also this sort of probing of what is the most important piece of the Mishnah, the notion that they split the value of the garment, or the fact that they each have to take an oath on the garment. So all of those things are sort of these precursor issues, which the Talmud in its own voice needs to work out. And so that's what we have done until now. And it's really only now that we bring the first comment of the Amoraim to bear, okay, the first stage of the Talmud. And in fact, I don't know why I did this as I was preparing tonight, but I looked at the Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi begins with the same statement of Rabbi Chia, who we're about to encounter just now. So the 2 pages of Talmud that have existed on this Mishnah so far are purely from the Babylonian mind. And you can see that it's really at this stage that the traditional, much more ancient approach to the Mishnah is finally taking hold.
And you know that it's from the Babylonian mind because
it's not in the Yerushalmi. It's just not there. And all of this notion of, who's talking is really the Mishnah. Could Rabbi Yossi be the Rebbe? Could Rabbi Yossi agree with our Mishnah? Could Ben Nanas agree with our Mishnah? All these sort of tangential questions are not deeply related to the Mishnah. And remember what we did last time. Maybe the whole thing should just be in escrow until Elijah comes. All those kinds of questions. They seem to be particularly associated with this sort of Babylonian attempt to try to square everything with everything else. So, yeah, Dara.
So what is in the Yerushalmi?
The Yerushalmi begins precisely after, I usually put these dotted lines to remind myself where we've broken 1 week, and the Yerushalmi begins with Rabbi Chia's statement, right? So all of this is just missing in the Yerushalmi. It jumps right ahead to Rabbi Chia. Sorry.
Is that a characteristic difference, or are you
Very
talking
much
about
so.
just in terms of
Very
this
much
case?
so. So both, very much so. The initial impulse to sort of analyze the language of the Mishnah, and then the second impulse to say, well, who is encompassed by the Mishnah? Which of the Tanaim, which of the sages of the Mishnah are encapsulated in this? Let's compare this to Tractate Shavuot, where there's this whole dispute about keeping things in escrow and why you swear, and sort of viewing the Mishnah not in its local context, but viewing the Mishnah sort of in a more broad global context, seems to be the approach of the anonymous voice of the Talmud. And so it's not really so weird, right? It's not out of the ordinary for the Talmud. It's just a later development. And this is probably the biggest difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, much more so than geography, is chronology. The Yerushalmi is just that much earlier. It reflects a much earlier vision of classical Talmudic approach to the Mishnah. There have been that many more generations of Babylonian sages who are interested in other things, and may be interested in sort of more global questions, and less purely local ones. But it's hard to say.
Can I tell a story?
Yes, please.
So my daughter just graduated from Morphew in St. Louis. And one of her best friends when she was there was a year ahead of her, so graduated a year before. And she sings beautifully. And she was part of the Jewish kids a cappella group. And the name of that a cappella group was Stom. And I had no idea what that was. And as a matter of fact, just last night, for reasons I won't disclose, my daughter has had a little obstacle in her life, and a romantic obstacle, and is wanting her mother to talk to her and spend time with her and help her go to sleep and so on. So I'm looking for topics about which I can discourse a long time so that she can relax and fall asleep. So last night I was telling her about the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud versus the Jerusalem Talmud. And I said, and you know what? I learned where that word stom comes from because I never knew. So anyway, this course has been so helpful in so many ways.
Good, good. And the reason why it's stam means sort of something like plain, right? In the sense that I'm using it, it means anonymous, right? Not having a name associated with it. And so that, yes, that's precisely where it comes from.
It's kind of ironic, though, to have that as your name, right? Of a group.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Unless
Anyway.
anonymity is part of the a cappella thing.
Maybe.
It's less about the solo voice and more about the melding of voices or something like that.
Right. That makes sense.
All right. So the first thing that we have to think about is this very first word here, which is tani. Right? Tani usually means to teach. And it's different from the way it would be if it said Amar, he said. And so Rabbi Chia is an interesting person, and we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about Rabbi Chia tonight and probably next time too. Rabbi Chia is sort of at the threshold between periods. He is the best student, the most famous student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah. He is mentioned in the Mishnah occasionally. So in many sense, he is a Tana. He has the authority of a Mishnaic sage. And yet he has another foot in the Amoraic period. And sometimes he says things which are not Tani, but Amar, he said, right? Seeing himself not as part of the Tanaitic group, but as the next generation. And so even though it says Tani here, we'll see from the context that Rabbi Chia really is not teaching as if he were a Mishnaic authority. He's going to say an idea that he has, which he will then support from our Mishnah. Okay, so Rabbi Chia is this sort of liminal figure, and we may have to try to figure out a little bit of why he's doing what he's doing. And Rabbi Chia's goal here is to compare the case in our Mishnah with another case. Okay, and so this is what he says. Tani Rabbi Chia taught, and he's going to teach another case. Okay, Maneh li biyadecha. So if one person says to another, 100 of mine is in your hands. Okay, which is the backwards way of saying you owe me $100. Now, why this person owes him $100 is not immediately clear. The most simple explanation is that I have loaned you $100, and now I'm asking to be repaid the $100 that I've loaned you. Vehala omer, and the other one says, Ein lacha biyadi klum. You have nothing in my hand at all. That is, I don't owe you anything. Okay, so this is a sort of normal kind of case. One party says, I'm owed $100. The other party says, I don't owe you anything. Could be his claim is, yes, I borrowed the money, but I already paid you back. or the claim is I've never seen you before in my life. Who are you? Right? But in any event, I don't owe you any money. But now there are witnesses who claim about him, me'idim oto, sheyesh lo 50 zuz, that in fact they know that this person owes 50 zuz. Now, exactly, once again, precisely what the case is it that the witnesses saw the initial borrowing of the 100? Or sorry, the initial borrowing of 50? Or did they witness a repayment of 50? Who knows? Both are possible. But the witnesses essentially are saying, to some degree, each one of them is telling the truth. Okay? The one who says you owe me is telling the truth because that one is in fact owed. And the one who is saying I don't owe you is in fact telling the partial truth because they don't owe that amount. They only owe half the amount. Okay? So in such a case, Rabbi Chia claims, noten lo 50 zuz, he should pay him the 50 zuz that the witnesses attest to, v'yishava al hashar, and he should swear an oath on the rest. Okay? And it's really, and you can see now why this is related to our case, because we have the sort of splitting the difference, and we have the taking of the oath. Okay. But what Rabbi Chia adds to this is shelo tehei hoda'at piv gedola meha'ada'at edim. In order that it should not be the case that admission of one's own mouth should be greater than the testimony of edim. So now, what is he talking about? So Rabbi Chia, will he say it explicitly? No, he won't. Okay, so what Rabbi Chia here is referring to is a well-known principle in the halacha. It's derived from, in a rather odd midrashic way, from Parshat Mishpatim in Exodus 22. And this is the case of what's called the modeh b'miktzat tana'ah, one who acknowledges a part of a claim. Okay, and it goes something as follows, similar to Rabbi Chia's case. If one says to the other, in the Talmud, the commentators always like to give them names, and usually the names are of the tribes of Israel. So we have Ruvain and Shimon. They usually go in birth order. Right? It's a really complicated case if we get all the way down to Yosef or something. Then it's really hard to keep track in your head. But Ruvain and Shimon is pretty easy to remember. Okay, so Ruvain says to Shimon, "You owe me $100." And Shimon says, "It's true that I owe you, but I only owe you 50. Okay? In that case, what happens is precisely the same thing that Rabbi Chia is talking in his case. Then Shimon pays the $50 that he acknowledges that he really does owe to Ruvain, but in addition says, I swear to God that I don't owe you the rest. Okay? And what Rabbi Chia is saying is that he thinks that his case that he's created should work the same way, okay? Because why should it be ultimately that that your own admission should be stronger than actual testimony? And what he's suggesting is that the real proof in Jewish law for anything, not proof, but the real convincing evidence in Jewish law is eyewitness testimony. And personal admission is normally a much lower level of proof. And therefore, Rabbi Chia is saying it's really important that my case exists in order that the general principle that the testimony of witnesses be taken more seriously than one's own admission. Yeah, Dara.
This is the Hobbesian view again. Everybody's going to lie and you can't trust anybody.
So yes, that's one thing at work. I think the other thing at work, and this is, I find this fascinating, is that Jewish law does not think highly of confession. In American law, if you go into the police station and say, I just killed somebody, lock me up, case closed. They'll lock you up. And if you, at trial, if you admit, right? How do you plea? And you say guilty, done. The Talmud in Sanhedrin says, Adam karov etzel atzmo ve'ein adam asim atzmo rasha, that a person is a close relative to him or herself, and you can't declare yourself to be an evildoer. In the same way that siblings and parents and children may not serve as witnesses for their close relatives, because so too a person is a close relative themselves. That is to say, in a court of Jewish law, if you claim to commit murder, it has no legal weight. Yeah, Sandra.
Well, that sounds logical, because a person is very ego involved and would say, yes, I didn't do it, thinking of his own benefit. But a witness would be more objective. So you have to have that point of view.
Yes, absolutely. And I would take it a step further, which is that we know all these cases, it's very easy to coerce people to self-incriminate themselves. You put someone in that room where you interrogate them for hours and hours and hours, and after 20 hours of the cops telling you, you really did it, you just want it to stop. So you say, okay, I'll sign the confession. Just stop, let me go to sleep, right? And then people get locked away for it. So this is a staggering principle, I think, and I agree with you. And I think this is to some degree what's sort of working himself out here, Rabbi Chi, is that despite this principle that you're not allowed to testify against yourself, somehow this principle of the partial admission is allowable and does have halachic weight, right? Now, the partial admission, you only pay what you admit, and you're able to get away with not paying that which the other claimant claims you owe. Now, it's true that you're forced to take an oath. Again, maybe the Hobbesian concern that we're really trying to deter people from doing the things that they tend to want to do. But this is sort of what Rabbi Chia is now comparing. He wants it, if it's true, as he assumes, and we know to be true, that the modeh b'miktzat ha'ta'ana, that the one who admits the partial claim pays what they say they owe and swears about the rest. Well, if that's the case, then the same thing should be true about if I say I didn't owe you anything, and I have witnesses who say that I owe Reuven half, okay? And then he says this cryptic thing, how do I know that? From a kal vachomer, okay? And we, in this class, we studied kal vachomers, right? This logical principle that if something should exist in the easy case, if I know something to be true about the easy case, then I also should apply that to a more significant case, right? I always use the bicycle and the motorcycle. If there's a law that you have to wear a helmet when you're bicycling, when you're not going so fast, and it's not so dangerous, well, then kal v'chomer, all the more so, you should have to wear a helmet when you're riding a motorcycle, pretty similar, and yet you're going much faster and it's much more dangerous, and therefore you should definitely wear a helmet. Okay, so that kind of logical argument is going to be employed. And the Talmud's going to ask in a moment, well, what is this kal v'chomer? Okay, but let's bracket that for a second, because Rabbi Chi is not done. Okay, and he says v'tana tuna, and Rabbi Chi says, I can prove to you the truth of my claim. That is to say, Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me 100. Shimon says back, no, I don't owe you anything. The witnesses say, well, we saw Shimon owe Reuven 50. In which case he has to pay the 50 and swear about the rest, okay? Rabbi Chia is going to prove that law from our Mishnah, okay? How so? Shnayim ochazin b'talit, there are two who are holding onto the talis. Zeh omer ani mitzatiha v'chulei, this one said, I found it, etc. And now we know that we're supposed to keep reciting. It's an oral text. Ani mitzatiha, kula shali. Then this one swears that he has no less than 50% stake in the talis, and this one swears he has no less than 50% take in the talis, and they split the talis. Okay, so both getting half of their claim and swearing on the rest. You can see the parallels. Okay, and the Talmud will explicate this now, and this is here you can sort of get the code switching of the Talmud, right? Rabbi Chia speaks in Hebrew. Manali biadecha. Right? It's a perfectly good Mishnaic Hebrew. Now the voice of the Talmud is going to explain exactly what Rabbi Chia means. Okay. So he says, in this case, Kevan de Tafis, because they're both grabbing onto the talus at the same time, Anan Sahade, Demai de Tafis Haididehu, we in the court, I guess, the judges, the bystanders, we become the witnesses, right? And we see that the half of the garment that Reuven is holding on to, well, that's Reuven's garment. Umay de Tafis Haididehu, and the part that Shimon is holding on to, that's his, okay? And we are witnesses. We are watching them hold things, okay? V'katani yishava. And it says, it teaches, they should swear, okay? So you can see it's really, Rabbi Chia knows his case from our Mishnah. It's precisely the same thing. We are the witnesses. We are just imagine that situation is sort of 2 times Rabbi Chia's situation, in which case his claim is, this is my thing, and you're holding on to it, right? Give it all to me. And we're saying, well, we're only seeing that you have half of it, therefore take your half and swear on the rest. And we do that twice, okay? So great. So far, so good. Rabbi Chia has shown that our Mishnah is really the source of his claim. And now at this point, the Talmud will ask the obvious question, okay? What did Rabbi Chia mean when he said it should be the case, right, that you should be able to prove by this kal v'chomer argument that the admission of the defendant, of the partial admission, shouldn't be result in a stronger law, that is, that you have to swear, than actually the testimony of witnesses. Okay, so what is this? Well, right? Why do we need this? What do we need a kal v'chomer to? What would I have stupidly thought otherwise? Okay, so the Gemara answers, Shalo Tomar, in order that you might not think the following. You might have thought the following incorrect thing, and here where we're really going to descend into Dara's Hobbesian world here. Okay, so and the stupid thing you might have thought is the thing raised by Rava. Okay, whom we'll now quote. De Amar Rava. Okay, Mifnei ma amra Torah modeh miktzat hata'ana yishava. Why is it that the Torah says, the Torah makes the one who admits a partial claim needs to take an oath? Okay, and in order to understand Rabba, you need to know one more thing about this case, which is there's a little bit of an oddity, because if the claimant says, I don't owe you anything, then they don't have to swear. They don't have to pay, and they don't have to swear, right? If Reuven shows up in court and says, Shimon, you owe me $100, and Shimon says, I've never seen you before in my life. Do you have any proof? And Reuven says back, no, but you're lying. Pay me my money. And Shimon says, I don't owe you any money. Well, we don't make Shimon pay because Reuven has no proof. But ironically enough, right, if Shimon would say back, it's true, you did loan me $100, but I already paid you back 50, right? Then the court makes him pay the 50 that he acknowledges that he owed, but it makes him take an oath on the rest. Okay, so this acknowledging the partial bit actually raises the stakes for the defendant in having to take an oath, that if they had only been smarter and just lied about the whole thing, they wouldn't have had to take an oath at all. Okay, so what is going on here? Okay. So the claim is, according to Rava, and again we're going to have to keep a lot in mind here. Chazaka, there is a presumption. Okay, Ein adam me'iz panav bifnei ba'al chova. Okay? The presumption is nobody would totally lie before their creditor. Here, in fact, it's the opposite of the Hobbesian claim. Right here, we have a kind of an optimism about human nature. Okay, which is people are not gonna. If your creditor takes you to court and says you owe me money, it's very unlikely that you're going to be a bold-faced liar to someone who did you a favor. And remember, in Jewish law, all of these loans are interest-free loans. Okay, so someone has done you a big favor by loaning you money, to then show up in court and say, "I've never seen you before in my life. I don't owe you any money." That's too far. Okay. Thus, okay. Okay. So the truth is, people would like to give a complete denial. Okay, right? But hadelo kafre, but the reason why he doesn't give a complete denial and instead only gives a partial denial, mishum de'ein adam me'iz panav, because a person wouldn't be so bold as to totally lie. So the truth is that this is a sort of a concession. We know that a person we think he's lying. Okay, we really do think that right, that he owes the whole money, but he's concocted this situation because he doesn't really want to totally lie in front of the creditor. Okay, and so it gives a partial admission. Okay, so now v'hai b'kulei ba'e delode le, right? And in truth, he may also wish, other part of his psyche, to just acknowledge it. Okay, but v'hai delo odi, and the reason why he doesn't admit, you're right, I owe you the money, ishtamotehu dekamishtament mine, because he's sort of messing around with him. He's trying to put him off a little bit. Savar, thinking, maybe I can sort of, I can put this off until I can find the money. Maybe I'll pay him 50 now, and then I'll find the other later. So I'll admit that I owe him 50 now, and then I'll, figure it out. Okay. The Amar Rachmana, and to that kind of psychology, the Torah says, Rame Shavua Ale Ki Hechi Delode Le Bakule. If right, the Torah thinks, and it's interesting how the Talmud sort of imagines the Torah as a sort of abstract idea, whether it's God or the Torah or whatever. The Torah figures, given that human nature is this way, on the one hand, he's not going to totally be so impertinent as to lie about it, but he's going to be somewhat impertinent that he's going to lie about some of it, and therefore we need to deter people from behaving this way. Therefore, we'll make them take an oath in order that they are disinclined to lie even at all and are inclined to admit when they really do owe. Okay. All right, so now we understand the situation, given that we know that this is how Rabbah understands the Modeh B'Miktzat HaTana case, the case in which you acknowledge partially, right? That oath is there because of this odd human psychology. We're not so terrible that we're going to lie about the whole thing, but we're pretty terrible because we're going to lie about some of it in order to not have to pay it all right away. And that's why the Torah thinks that there has to be an oath. Okay, given that situation, we might think something stupid about witnesses, right? Aval hada'at edim deleka lamemer hachi. However, when it comes to the testimony of witnesses, where there's no reason to suggest, oh, maybe he's messing around with him, he's going to pay him some and later. No, the witnesses say what they think is the actual truth. There's no psychology involved, okay? So given that difference between the person who admits the partial claim and the witnesses who testify to a partial claim, we might be disinclined to bring the whole notion of the oath when it comes to witnesses. Okay, right? Emalo. Therefore, I would think that in the witnesses case, you don't have to make them take an oath, and therefore kamash malan kal v'chomer. And that's why Rebbe Chia said that we need to make sure that so too the witnesses are strong enough to force an oath, and that argument can be made from the Kal V'chomer that we're going to interrogate next, right? And that's what the Talmud will say next. My Kal V'chomer, what is this mysterious Kal V'chomer that proves that the testimony of witnesses are just as strong as the admission of one's own mouth? Okay. So, sort of in thinking about in thinking about the our sort of Hobbesian question, I wonder if we've moved a little bit, right? Because it seems almost that the Talmud assumes that everybody is torn in two directions at once. On the one hand, they want to do the right thing, and on the other hand, they want to do what's financially most in their own interests. So it's not that they're all evil or that they're all good. They're sort of stuck in the middle at some point. Yeah, Dara.
It's almost like the Torah is imposing the oath to help the person, assuming the person wants to do the right thing, but just giving them the extra push they need to
very much so. Yeah, and I think this is a common rabbinic sort of metaphor, that you're sort of constantly wanting to think of about people sort of on the very narrow line. They're being pulled in the good way and in the bad way, and they're stuck precisely in the middle. And all they need is a little push, right, to err on the side of the better side of human nature. Yeah, Sandra.
Well, what about a case of a misunderstanding? Like if someone thinks the price is $50, where the one who sold it said, no, it's $100. So what about that situation? In all honesty, the person who purchased it pays the $50, thinks okay, he's done the right thing.
So that, I mean, I wonder how long we will continue in this class. That topic is explicitly picked up in the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia, of our tractate. This is the principle in Hebrew which is called ona'ah, which is sort of accidental defraudment, and it goes in both cases. That is accidental underpaying and accidental overcharging. And the answer is, ironically, a great deal of it is going to be about sort of the true market value, right? That a purchaser, and the rules are going to be a little bit different if you're a professional purchaser, if you're not a professional purchaser, but the notion that most people, it's the legal system can assume that any reasonable person ought to know about what an object should cost. Right? If you're really getting a car for 50% off, right? If it seems to be too good to be true, then it probably is. And if it turns out that you have paid half the price that it is expected, then the sale is invalid, right? It's not your car and it's not the dealer's money, and that everything has to revert to the way it was before. The difficult questions are going to be around, well, what if you're off by about a sixth? Right? About which they think that maybe reasonable discounters would, right? If I got, what's a sixth? 15% off, right? 15% off. Okay, it's a big discount, but it's not so crazy to imagine that the car dealership has so much extra stock and it needs to clear out its inventory for the next year and whatever. So if sixth is, so in those kinds of cases, we're going to have to try to adjudicate. And so that topic definitely comes up. And there, right, there are going to be cases where we assume that it's a communication problem. Now, all of this can be avoided very simply, as long as you just bring witnesses with you everywhere, right? And the Talmud will say this constantly. It's on you if you don't have your witnesses, right? Either do it in writing, so that we can see the shtar after it's written, and then Ruvain agrees who pays Shimon $100, or I've got two good witnesses who say we saw Shimon borrow $100. That's going to be the thing that gets us out of these messy situations.
Documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So now, having made sense out of Rabbi Chia, at least logically, well, now we want to know what this kal v'chomer is. In what way is it that this relationship between the mouth which admits and the eidim who testify? Okay, let's see if we can figure out what this kal v'chomer is. Okay, and that is to say, given that I know that the mouth is enough to cause the oath, we need to construct a case where the mouth is the kal, is the easy case, and the witnesses are the chamor, is the heavy case, right? The bicycle and the motorcycle. Right? Okay. So my kal v'chomer, what is this kal v'chomer argument? Okay, so we're going to have a number of attempts, and the Talmud loves to play this game, which is we really need an airtight kal v'chomer. Okay, and it must be that Rabbi Chia had a really, really good one. And so what we want to do is we want to propose a kal v'chomer that Rabbi Chia would be thinking of, and then we want to attack it to see if it can withstand scrutiny. And if it can't withstand scrutiny, then we're going to throw that away and try to find a new kal v'chomer. We're going to do this 3 times. Okay, the Talmud loves the number 3. Okay, so attempt number 1. Uma piv she'ein mechayavin mamon mechayavin shvua. Now, let's think about the mouth, which cannot obligate one to pay money. Okay, and nonetheless, that mouth that admits is enough to pay, is enough to make him take an oath. Okay, therefore, edim shemechayavim oto mamon, witnesses which are more strong because they can make you pay money. Enodin shemechayavim oto shavua. Is it not logical that they should also make you take the oath? That sounds like a good kal v'chomer, right? To which the Talmud says, that's a terrible kal v'chomer. Upiv ein mechayavin mamon. Since when can one's own mouth not obligate you to pay money? Ha hoda'at baldin k'mea edim dameh. The admission of one's mouth is like 100 witnesses. Okay, this is true about monetary cases, not about capital cases, about the death penalty cases or things like that. But if Ruvain says to Shimon, "You owe me $100," and Shimon says, "Yes, I do," case closed, and Shimon pays. Okay, so what is going on? This kal v'chomer doesn't make any sense. Okay, so the Talmud will try again. Now, the Talmud clearly knows this. And so the sort of broad question is, why does the Talmud sometimes proffer something so stupid that it immediately returns to challenge how stupid it is and reevaluate it? I think sometimes the Talmud wants to sort of teach you. It's not simply educational in terms of content, but also in terms of form. You start by trying the most simple kal v'chomer, and then you attack that. This is probably related to sort of ancient rhetorical training. If you know anything about ancient history, you know that sort of paideia culture in the Greco-Roman world. This is how young elite Greco-Roman men were trained in rhetoric, right? And you had to sort of learn how to make these kinds of rhetorical arguments and learn how to attack them. So it's sort of displaying this, okay? So we're going to tweak it, okay? My mamon knas, okay? What is mamon in this case? What is money in this case? Fines, okay? So for example, the claim is that your own admission cannot make you obligated to a fine. So what kind of fine could it be? So Rashi gives a number of examples. One is that if this also comes from Parshat Mishpatim, if I agree to watch an object for someone, right, and something bad happens to that object, right, because I'm negligent, right? You asked me to watch your laptop while you go to the bathroom in the coffee shop, and I say, sure, I'd be happy to watch your laptop. And then you come back from the bathroom and the laptop's gone. And I say, I was looking at it the whole time. I don't know what possibly could have happened to it. I swear I didn't, I had nothing to do with it. And then it turns out that really you stole the laptop, okay? Then you would have to pay not only the value of the laptop, but the double value of the laptop as a fine for having lied about it. Now, how would this come out? Only if witnesses saw that you took the laptop for yourself. But if you, after taking the laptop for yourself, then said, you know what? I lied. I stole the laptop. Here's your laptop back. Then you don't have to pay the fine. And again, it's probably in terms of incentives. We want to incentivize people to do the right thing and tell the truth. And if they're not only going to have to give it back, but pay double for it, well, then they're going to be less inclined to tell the truth. Okay, so it must have been in Rabbi Chia's Kal V'chomer. All we have to replace is money in general with money in this very particular kind of case, that whereas one's own mouth is not strong enough to make you pay a fine, okay, and yet your mouth is strong enough to make you take an oath, well, then all the more so witnesses who are strong enough to make you pay a fine should likewise be strong enough to make you take an oath. Okay? So they say it explicitly, umapiv she'ein mechayavin mechayevo knas, your mouth, which cannot obligate you to pay a fine, nonetheless mechayevo shavua, it makes you take an oath. Edim shemechayavim oto knas, witnesses who can make you pay the fine. Is it not reasonable that they should make you take the oath? Right. So that seems to be the really good Kal V'chomer. Okay. Now we've figured it out. Okay. So the Talmud is going to say, well, wait a second. Maybe we could attack this Kal V'chomer based on logic. Okay. And I've tried to give us a couple of sort of guide signposts to remind us at which stage of the argument we are, because it can be confusing to keep it all in our heads. Okay, so the best way to attack a Kal V'chomer is to attack the assumption of which is the light case and which is the heavy case. Okay, and to say, well, your assumption that the mouth is sort of less strong because it can't force one to pay a fine, well, that's not the only difference between these two cases. And there's another way in which the person's own mouth is in fact stronger than witnesses. Okay, and here it is: Malapiv shekein mechayevo korban tomar be'edim she'ein mechayevo oto korban. Right now, what about the case of having to bring an offering? Okay, that is to say, if you yourself go to the temple and say, I messed up, right? I should have, right? I ate a cheeseburger, right? And now I'm supposed to bring a korban to apologize to God for having eaten a cheeseburger. Well, now you have to do it, okay? But other people cannot force you to make a korban. That's a sort of individual spiritual thing, okay? It's none of anybody else's business, okay? If you, it's true that witnesses could get you in trouble if you said, I'm going to eat cheeseburgers in public every day because God is stupid and the Torah is bad and I hate Judaism, right? And you sit in the public square and you eat cheeseburgers all day long to thumb your nose at Jewish religion. The witnesses could go to the Beit Din and say, Bickart has lost it and he is making Judaism look bad. And the court could lock me up or threaten to whip me until I stop or things like that. But they can't make me bring the offering. You have to want to bring the offering. Yeah, go ahead, Dara.
So it just seems to me like what priority, what weight, what valence do you give to each of the things?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And this is the best way, so let's say you wanted to attack my bicycle to motorcycle Kal V'chomer, right? You would say, well, wait a second, Noah, right? you think that it's sort of less serious to wear a helmet when you're cycling. Maybe not. Maybe it's more dangerous to be on a bicycle. After all, on a motorcycle, you can keep up with traffic. You can go 65 miles an hour, right? Whereas a bicycle, you're really at the mercy of other people because they're passing you all the time. That doesn't exist with a motorcycle. So maybe it's actually more important to wear a helmet when you're bicycling than when you're motorcycling. Okay. Now, I don't know what the truth is, right? But the relationship to bicycle to motorcycle, from one perspective, how fast can it go? Yes, one is light and the other is heavy. But maybe that perspective is not the right perspective. Maybe we should be thinking about acceleration ability, in which case it's much harder to accelerate a bicycle quickly than it is a motorcycle, or something like that. And that's precisely what we're doing here. Okay. So don't tell me that witnesses are so much more powerful because they can make you pay a fine. Maybe your own mouth is more powerful because it can make you bring an offering. Okay? Now, that would be great, but the Talmud says, no, don't go down that path. Halo kashya, that is no problem whatsoever. Why? Because it's possible to claim Rabbi Chia ka Rabbi Meir svirale. Maybe Rabbi Chia agrees with Rabbi Meir, de Amar, who says Eidim mechayavim to korban. Right? It's possible that Rabbi Chia agrees with the well-known opinion of Rabbi Meir that witnesses can force you to take a korban. Now, how does Rabbi Meir know that witnesses can make you bring an offering? Kal v'chomer. Rabbi Meir has a kal v'chomer that he wants to employ in order to prove that. Okay, Ditznan, as we learned in a Mishnah in Masachet Yevamot, Amrulo Shnaim, Achalta Chelev. If two persons says to one, you ate chelev. You know about chelev. Chelev is the fat that surrounds the internal organs of animals, that which is completely burnt up on the fire. And it is something, I guess, suet, sometimes it's translated, and that is not kosher. Okay, it has to be removed. Okay, and this is the Talmud's favorite example of doing a forbidden thing, because, and we always used to call them chelev French fries, right? Because the difference between forbidden fat and permitted fat is really not much of a difference. You really could accidentally fry your potatoes in chelev as opposed to in fat, and you would never really know the difference. Okay, so if they say to him, "You ate chelev, you bad Jew," okay, v'hu omer lo achalti, okay, and he says, "I had no French fries." Okay, Rabbi Meir mechayev v'chachamim potrim. Rabbi Meir says he has to bring the korban shogeg, the accidental screw up offering. Whereas the sages say you don't, right? You only have to do it if you yourself acknowledge. Okay. So, what is Rabbi Meir's kal v'chomer? Rabbi Meir, im heviyuhu shnaim lidei mita chamura. If two witnesses can put somebody to death for what they see that person do, okay, lo heviyuhu lidei korban hakal. Is it not logical that they should be able to obligate somebody in a much less severe punishment, giving an offering? Okay. Amru lo, okay. So the sages say back to Rabbi Meir, Ma'im yirtze lomar mezid hayiti yiftar. Okay, to which the sages says that's a ridiculous situation, because anybody who wanted to get out of having to bring the accidental offering could lie and say, I did it on purpose. In which case they would be patur, they would be exempt from having to bring the offering. Okay. So now we're sort of, you see what we've done. We're sort of in the middle of trying to figure out Rabbi Chia's kal v'chomer. And in the middle of trying to figure out Rabbi Chia's kal v'chomer, we're now in the middle of Rabbi Meir's kal v'chomer in the middle of this kal v'chomer. Okay, to which we could say, right? Okay, fine. So I think we're done. We're done with principle number one. Yeah, with attempt number one. Right. Attempt number one was to attack Rabbi Chia's kal v'chomer. Right. on the notion of on having to bring an offering, and the response is no, that's not a good attack on Rabbi Chia, because it's at least theoretically possible that Rabbi Chia aligns himself by Meir, and therefore that attack on Rabbi Chia's Kal V'chomer is rejected. Okay? And all that means is that the Talmud is then going to try again to attack Rabbi Chia on the basis of another way in which what is assumed to be the kal, the light, and what's assumed to be the chamor, the heavy, is a mismatch. Okay. So, any questions before maybe we'll have time for one more little one?
The question.
Yeah.
So it seems that the argument, the Kal V'chomer that said, if two witnesses can bring someone to have a penalty of death, why not? But that seems to me a totally specious argument, because it says witnesses, but it doesn't say witnesses to what? What is the offense?
Well, that's true. You're right.
I'm assuming that the offense that brings a penalty of death is much more serious than eating the wrong kind of fat.
Absolutely. But the principle is not, the issue is not the crime. The issue is the level of evidence needed to convict someone of the crime, right? And the principle, and what's being compared is on what, how much evidence do I need?
The witnesses can add, how much
Exactly.
weight the witness.
How much evidence do I need?
I hear you, but I think witnesses carry a different weight in different crimes. So,
right. I mean, the general principle is, and this is an explicit pasuk. Al pi edim, al pi shnei edim yumat hamet. Where is that? It's in Exodus. On the testimony of two witnesses shall a person be put to death. Okay, so this is the classic cases in Talmudic in Talmudic law is of murder, right? That if you see one person about to stab somebody else to death, right, the only way that person can be convicted of murder, and it's complicated. Not only do you need witnesses, but you also need, and this is going to come up. It's good that we're talking about this, because this is going to come up soon enough. What's required is both edim and hatra'ah. You need both witnesses and warning. And the level for conviction of a death penalty case is almost comically high, right? The two witnesses have to be there. They are questioned about the time and the place. They're questioned individually about the time and the place, and their words have to be exactly right. They have to be within an hour, right? In a world before watches, that's hard. And so not only do they have to be identified precisely when and where the crime occurred, they have to be able to describe the clothing of both perpetrator and victim and the murder weapon. And they have to have warned the perpetrator. And that warning has to include citation of the relevant biblical verse, right? So you have to say, hey, excuse me, don't you know that the Torah says, lo tirtzach, don't murder? And the person says, yes, I'm going to do it anyway, right? If that happens, then those two witnesses can be brought to court to convict someone of murdering someone else. Okay, this is all in the 5th chapter of Tractate Sanhedrin. But the principle here is that at least what Rabbi Meir is saying is, if we allow, at least in theory, the possibility that how do you get convicted of a death penalty case? Witnesses. That's really strong. That's the worst penalty, right? Being put to death is the absolute worst thing that could ever happen to you. Having to bring a korban, right? Yeah, you're out the money for the cow, but it's not so, compared to being put to death, is much less severe a punishment. So again, by this logical inference, if testimony of witnesses is enough to put somebody to death, well, then all the more so it should be enough to require them to bring a korban. Now, but I do find the sage's response, which is actually very interesting, which is, come on, bringing a korban is not a punishment. Right? Bringing a korban is an act of voluntarily trying to repair your relationship with God. It's not a legal. Yeah, sometimes the legal system requires you to do moral things like make up with God or something like that. But it's not exactly the same kind of thing. It's not a punishment in the same kind of way. Whereas for Rabbi Meir says, sure it is, right? Right? Maybe it's like community service. You're supposed to do community service because you're supposed to help your community because it's the right thing to do. But sometimes a judge can sentence you to community service and then you have to do it. And if you don't do it, you go to jail, right? So we have a sort of another legal principle that's being debated there. It's totally tangential to our point. But once it's at least theoretically possible that Rabbi Chia could agree with Rabbi Meir, well, now this challenge falls apart and we're going to have to start all over again. So we'll start all over again next week with another challenge against Rabbi Chia. And you will have to keep me posted, right? If you get too bored of these rabbit holes, I mean, I love this stuff. I could study Bava Metzia forever, but I also acknowledge that there's sometimes the rabbit holes go very deep. So you'll just keep me updated, and at some point we will we'll move on to other topics. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Toda rabah.
See you next week.
See you next week, everyone.
Bye.